This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all of those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Don't decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. This is the word of the Lord. Contemporary Christians have had a fractured relationship with the city for a very long time. There's a lot of reasons for this, some sociological, some theological, some economical. But we have a time today for only one of those elements, and so let's take a moment to consider the theological reason for the fractured relationship Christians have had with the city. A preeminent factor contributing to Christianity's negative view of the city comes from the selective emphasis on exceptionally negative biblical narratives of the city. Three prominent ones come to mind: the stories of Babel, the story of Sodom, and the story of Babylon. In the story of Babel, humans are living together with one language, but God scatters the people, changes their languages, and they are placed all over the earth because of their hubris. In Sodom, the ancient traveler Lot chose to live in the city in contrast to the pastoral life of his relative, only to find that the particular city that he chose was hostile towards strangers and violent against those with different cultural practices. And then finally, the narrative of Babylon, that ancient city that is used metaphorically after the height of its power to describe all that is corrupt and evil, forcibly removed the people, the Israelite people, from Jerusalem and brought them to Babylon. I was asked, as it was mentioned, to speak this morning about being missional in the city, and it's in the story of Babylon that we find some of the most concise instructions and effective strategies to being missional in the urban context. First of all, our text of emphasis here says to these people who were exiled in Babylon, they are to build houses and to settle down. Settle down and make yourself a home. God is telling these people, settle down. The implication was clear. These exiles are going to be in Babylon for some time, and they are to make the city their home. Now, in the case of those who were exiled to Babylon, God had to provide war to get them to go to the city. For some of us, God has called us to the city not because of war, but because he's given us an inclination to live in the city. And that certainly doesn't mean that we do that because everything in the city is fantastic. I mean, there are harmful and hurtful things in the cities, just like there are in every place. But this idea of living in the city, and in particular for these exiles, God chose them to live there for 70 years. You know, the exile could have been a much shorter period, but it seems like God wanted them to be engaged and to live in this foreign city for some time. He wanted them to settle down. He wanted them to build houses. He wanted them to make the city their home. We think about the reasoning for that. Certainly God wanted them to have an impact on the city of Babylon, but also for Babylon to have an impact on them. We think of people like Daniel, who spent his time in Babylon. Not only did he have a powerful influence in the city, but the city had a powerful influence on him. And so the relationship that Christians are called, or followers of Jesus are called, to have with the city is one of give and take. It's not just that we go and we give all of our wisdom and all of our teaching to the city, but that we also learn from the city. There's something powerful about being together with people who you are unfamiliar with, being together with the diverse cultures and and elements that come from a city. I know personally I've learned a lot from being in my city. And so God instructing these people to settle down and build homes. This assertion by God attacks one of the primary strategies that Christians have used in contemporary times for ministry to the city, and that is the parachute method. You know the parachute method where we send people in, we send missionaries in, they parachute into the city, they do their work, and then they get out of there as quickly as possible, right? That's particularly for an Adventist context, that has been our primary strategy for the city for a long time. Get in there and get out as quickly as possible. And so we got to take heart to what God is telling to these people back in Babylon, of all cities. Settle down, build homes, make yourself at home there. There's some implications, I think, for the church at large as well. Hey, if we're going to have ministry workers in cities, we've got to make sure that we can provide for them so that they can actually live in the city. I have many of my pastoral colleague friends. I mean, I'm blessed that my church has a little parsonage. I'm able to live between Park Avenue and Lexington Avenue in the Upper East Side. A lot of my colleagues can't live in that context because we can't afford to. And so if the church is going to get serious about doing missional work in the city, we've got to find a way to help people actually live in the city, especially our workers. It's my little soapbox. I'm going to get off of it now. Thank you. Where's the timer here? Okay, 10 minutes. Settle down. Make yourself a home. We need people committed to the good news who are living in the cities. Think of Aquila and Priscilla, invested in their city. When the Apostle Paul comes, who, by the way, lived in cities. Let's not mistake. I mean, we think of Apostle Paul bouncing all over the place, but when he went, he spent years in cities. He lived and worked and cared for the city. And he went and he visited with people like Aquila and Priscilla who were living in the cities, doing good work with their hands in the city. God is calling people to live in the cities just like he called those Israelites way back in Babylon. Secondly, the text said that they were to marry and have sons and daughters. Engage in relationships in the city. The city should be full of vibrant and happy and growing faith communities. Weddings and births should be an essential element of a faith community, of a Christian community, of an Adventist community in the heart of the city. My wife and I took this to heart. We got married right here at Andrews University, or during our time here, I should say, as undergrads at Andrews. Went through seminary together, waited 12 years for having kids. We're pastoring in the Manhattan of Indiana, Indianapolis. Bada boom, joke. Thank you for getting that. Anyway, we're in Indianapolis, right nicely planted between my parents and her parents in Louisville, my parents right here in Michigan. And we got an invitation to come to Church of the Advent Hope in New York. And we accepted that invitation. We started planning our move and found out that we were pregnant. So 12 years we had waited to have kids, and so my parents and her parents angry with us because we were leaving 2 hours commute to us, and we were leaving all the way 12 hours away. But we had all three of our children right on Mount Sinai Hospital on 5th Avenue in New York City, and so we took this command to marry and have families in the city to heart. And hey, this is what we need: vibrant faith communities in the city. We cannot abandon the city. And the parachute method, I'm just going to be honest with you, it doesn't work very well. Okay? I'm not saying that we don't have Pauls who are bouncing in and out of the city from time to time, even though he lived in the city too. But we need faith communities in the city, and that means we need people of faith who are living in the cities. Marry, have relationships, have families. I love this. Don't decrease. For heaven's sake, don't decrease, God tells them. Increase in the city. Finally, seek the peace and prosperity of the city. Work for the good of the cities. Cities aren't evil in and of themselves, just like nowhere is evil in and of themselves. We are called to be urban peacemakers. I was excited last night to meet my new friends Kefra and Erica, who are going to be speaking later today. They are peacemakers in New York City, working against gun violence and other kinds of violence. People of faith are called to be in the city and to be peacemakers. Seek the peace and the prosperity of the city. Being about peace in the city is important work, and so we should be thinking not only, though, of the peace, but also the prosperity. And you know, a place like New York is all about prosperity and being prosperous, and so the command here is that people living in the city of Babylon were to work both for the peace and the prosperity of the city. And so if you live in the city, or if you're engaged in the city, if you're a Christian who wants to be missional, then we need to be seeking not only the peace, but also the prosperity of the city. And so we should be fighting for fair incomes and fair housing in our city. Prosperity, not just for a select few, by the way, but for everyone. This is part of the work of faith communities and people of faith in the city, to be fighting for economic justice, fair housing, fair incomes, and so on. I mean, if we're not going to do it, who's going to do it? Are we going to leave that work up to other people? No, people of faith need to be having their voices heard in the hearts of the city, and that requires us to not parachute in, but to live there, to be invested there, to be having families there, and to be seeking the peace and the prosperity of the city. You know, if we think about the work of Jesus, certainly Jesus did this. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 6, we read these famous words. Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. Being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a human, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. We have this great example of incarnation, of Jesus coming and being not just with us, but being us, being humans. He didn't zip in and out from another realm. He didn't parachute in. He didn't come and preach and then out of town he is so he doesn't get his hands dirty. Jesus got his hands dirty by becoming a human. Walked and talked and laughed and cried among us. And this is the invitation to anyone who is interested and excited in being missional in our cities, that we too are to be incarnational. We are to become people of the city. We are to be peacemakers in the city. We are to seek the prosperity of the city. My friend Nicholas Zork, who is a colleague in ministry in my congregation in New York, says that Jesus got in trouble not for loving people, but for liking people. And I think that translates well to being missional in the city. That God has not called us just to love the city. You can love the city a long way away. God has called us to like the city. Because the city and its cultural institutions and its museums and all that make it what it is are really the result of people. And God loves the world. God loves people. Jesus loved people. He spent time with people, and he also liked them. And so God is calling and looking for people who are willing to like the city, to be engaged in the city, to settle down and make homes in the city, to have families in the city, to build vibrant faith communities, and to be about the peace and the prosperity of the city. Jesus is our example in this, but not only is he our example, he gives us the power to do this. He gives us the inclination. I mean, I was compelled. I was right here at Andrews University, and I was studying it again in undergrad when I read the writings of Ellen White. You know, Ellen White is used so much against the city. We got to get out. Got to get out because Ellen White says that we got to get out. And we forget the stories about people like S.N. Haskell. She instructed to go live in the city, in New York in particular. And I was impressed in my own experience by reading Ellen White that God is calling people into the city. And it's because of Ellen White that I live in the city. And so this view that she's only telling people, get out, get out, get out, it's not healthy and it's not helping our cities. And maybe that's why we're so ineffective in the city. And let's be honest, we're ineffective in the city. I mean, thank God that we're having a time here. And when I say ineffective, it doesn't mean that there aren't good things happening in the city. But there is so much more that could be happening in the city, but we've got to invest our time and energy in the city, and that means building homes and settling down It means building relationships and having families. And it means seeking the peace and prosperity of the city. God is calling us into this, but he doesn't leave us to do this on our own. Jesus has already done it, and he empowers us through the power of the Spirit as we embrace his work to do what we cannot do on our own. To give us an inclination of like, not just love, for the people of our city. And so today, as we begin this journey together, exploring what it means to be people who care about the city, who love and like the city, my prayer is that God may work through us so that we can have like, not love. And as he calls us, some of us at least, to settle down and make homes and to develop lifelong relationships and to seek the peace and prosperity of our cities, that we may be blessed and that we may be a blessing. Amen.